have you here.
And for other folks, if you're able to introduce yourself in the chat, share your name, where you're coming from, and if you'd like to put your pronouns either in your introduction or in your name box on Zoom, feel free to do that. We'll get started. As much as we would love to just do karaoke all morning, that is not what we promised you. So we will get started here. And as we get into this morning's program, I just want to do a little bit of housekeeping. We know it's early, so if you want to leave your video off for the moment, that's great. There are going to be a couple of conversation spaces, and so as we get into those conversation spaces, I think it's lovely if you're able. We would love to see your face. And I want to just recognize up front, this is not a networking space in the traditional sense. So this is not a space, if you came here to add more names to your mailing list or to advertise a product, this is not that space. But this is a space for connectedness. So when I think about what this space is, I think about, my mind goes to the ecological, to the mycelium that grows on tree roots and creates a connected root system in the forest. And that's how I think about this space, as a space where you gather the nutrients and you send those nutrients through the network so that each of those individual trees becomes stronger. And in that spirit, this is a space for nonprofit leaders. And so if you don't fit that description, you're welcome to stay, take what this session has to offer you. But I want to acknowledge that this focus is on feeding the forest of nonprofit leaders in Southeast Michigan. And we are very excited here to have Patricia and Sharonda, and I'll introduce them in just a moment. We can bounce forward on the slides. I will also pause and introduce myself. My name is Hillary Watson. I'm a program consultant at NEW. Also here from NEW is Hamida Bhagirathi. We're excited to have, we will be co-facilitating this session. So if you have any questions throughout this series, or if you need to reach out to either of us, those are the two people if you're having technological issues or anything else. Hamida, do you want to add anything?
Yeah, I think you got it, Hill. Good morning, everyone. So Hill and I are going to be alternating the chat. So if anything comes up for you, questions, thoughts, insights you want to talk with each other about, feel free to drop it in the chat.
Yep, and NEW work to, what we do is equip mission-driven people, organizations, and communities and advance visions of a just and thriving society. So what else have we got? All right. Objectives, we just want to let you all know what we're aiming for in this space. Again, this is a space for nonprofit leaders for collecting wisdom and resources and doing that wisdom sharing. Recognizing we have two lovely presenters today, and we'll also be trying to pool our collective wisdom as well in this space. And next slide. We want to acknowledge as we come into this space, the kind of space that we are trying to build. So these are the norms that we ask you to keep in mind, and I'll highlight just a couple of, since this is a space for nonprofit leaders, you're processing what's going on at your organization, the different complex questions that you're holding. So we really want to honor the confidentiality. We want to stay focused on our common goal, which is to make the world better, right? That's why we're in the nonprofit sector. And that this is a space for heart-centered listening and sharing. And in that spirit, Hamida is going to introduce a little icebreaker. This is a new kind of experiment for us, so we're excited to see how this goes.
Thanks, Hill. So we hoped for this space that this would also be a time for folks to be able to connect with each other. So we'll be spending 5 minutes in breakout rooms in pairs, sharing about our own personal experiences with burnout and with rejuvenation. So you're going to see a host of questions. This is choose your question to start off with the day. We're looking at having small groups, and you'll just chat about really kind of what evokes for you when you think about burnout and rejuvenation related to the questions. Hill and I are not going to ask you to share out your responses. This is a time for you to sort of like ground yourself. So we're going to spend 5 minutes answering two questions, and I will also paste this in the chat. When was a time that you felt burnout? And really think about how did that manifest in your body? How did you know that you were burned out? Or you can choose to answer. So, what are the spaces that you feel harmony with the work that you do, and how does that keep you going? So, thank you, Hillary, for working on breakout rooms. And I will be dropping the prompts in the chat, and I will also send them out.
Thanks, Hamida.
Mm-hmm.
So we've got mostly pairs. There might be a group of 3 in here. I am going to send you out and we'll see you in 5 minutes. And Hamida, I did send you to a group, but you do not have to go there. I sent you to a group of 3. I'm gonna pause the recording. I'm gonna restart the recording. How were those breakout groups? All right,
Good.
we've got a few folks still coming back. All right, looks like everyone is with us again. So I want to introduce our speakers. And we're going to ask you to mute yourselves again if you're able. And we have 2 wonderful speakers this morning, presenters. Sharonda Simmons has a deep-rooted passion for social justice and has served as a trained facilitator in intergroup dialogue. She is currently part of the executive team at Ozone House and serves as the Director of Education and Outreach. In 2020, she founded Thrive and Shine LLC, professional development and mentorship space geared towards BIPOC, Black, Indigenous, and people of color young professionals. She was also a participant in New's first Champion for Change cohort. And Patricia Berry is the owner, chief fundraising possibilist at Patricia Berry Consulting, a place to find your inner fundraising superhero and relationship-centered business badass. In her spare time, Patricia runs with scissors, lacks resistance to pie, and dawdles in gardens, ideas, and conversations. And she is a current participant in New's Champions for Change program. So, Hamida, do you want to pause our presentation? And we'll welcome Sharonda and Patricia. And just to start off our conversation, I'm curious how each of you would define burnout and where you've seen it or what it's looked like for you at various points in your life. Sharonda?
Oh, how have I defined burnout and how has it looked at me at various points in life? I think burnout for me has been like, I can't do it anymore. It's kind of like this, like a pressure cooker. Like I see some people nodding their heads. Yeah, that's how it feels for me, is that like my container is to the point where it's not boiling over in like a love overflow way. It's literally like my capacity has stretched. I think that's come from when I felt like I haven't been able to make meaningful change, or there's an issue at work or personally that is really pressing, but I'm sort of this area of being stuck. And so I noticed that in like my body sometimes when it's like my brain is trying to overcompensate, or the basic things that I want to remember, like someone's name, I can't. And so, yeah, for me, I think it's to the point where I'm not able to really function as like my basic healthy self, is how that is manifested. And I can kind of tell that that's where I've shifted to the point of burnout.
So I'm going to follow up on Sharonda's image of the boiling pot. Like for me, burnout is when my cup's empty. I feel like I have nothing that feeds me. I have nothing to share. And I think for me, I love what I do for a living. It's really about community through the lens of how we exchange resources and how we help each other. And when I'm really in a happy place at work and home and family and all that good stuff, I don't need a vacation from that. Like I'm not doing that kind of narrative of, oh my God, I really need a vacation. That in this last job that I had, I really recognized that about every 3 weeks, I was feeling desperate for a vacation. Like that for me was a good indication that you're not at a place that's continuing to kind of fill that cup back up. And that's when I was really starting to pay attention to that as for me, the feeling of burnout. And it comes physically for me. Like I get this little knot right in my chest. You'll see whenever I get anxious, I always do that. Calm down. I was doing that a lot in my last job.
So I think that sort of begs the question then, and you are both fairly new entrepreneurs who also spent a long time in your other roles. So I'm curious, what is the tension between, how do you hold the do I need rejuvenation in this work, or is it time for something new?
I would say for me, when I felt like I need rejuvenation, there's something that I can go back to that's the root of it. And so I've done youth work for a great portion of my career. And so going back to being able to like more adequately engage with young people, or going back to times where I can kind of place myself in like, why did I start this? So like the direct service work, being able to do a workshop with young people, or being able with staff to have like really meaningful conversations, like sometimes getting back to the thing that brought me joy or sparked me, and realizing that that gives me a different set of energy. Like, oh, okay, like I think I just needed to come back to like why I did this in the first place. And that feels really, and I can tell it gives me a certain kind of energy. Like it brings me joy. I maybe feel a little warm on the inside. It helps me now creatively go, okay, now I can solve this thing that's been an issue or that's been a problem for me. That's what I feel like in the workspace rejuvenation has been. Or it's been like, okay, let me take a little bit of time and pause, and I can go back to it. What I found for me with burnout is that I don't want to go back. So it's, you go on vacation and you're like, oh my gosh, like consistently, I don't want to go. Or I wake up and I don't have the capacity to be my best self and do my best work. And so everything I'm doing and operating from is from a lens of deficit. So even when I think about what I care for, why I started, even in like my recent work relationship, there's nostalgia there, and there's love for like why I came into like crisis management work and trauma work. But just because I have love for it, it's not filling me to like move creatively, or it's not giving me that thing that's like, okay, now I know what to do next. And so it's kind of thinking like you've like hit the cap. It's like you're trying to take it off, but it's not coming back up. So for me, that's been a sign of, okay, it's time to pivot. Like you served how you need to serve, you supported how you needed to support other people, but now there's not even the learning and the service for me. I'm just getting back to the cap. And so that maybe it's time to, even if it's uncomfortable, shift into like a new career space, shift into a new mental space. So that to me is the difference between rejuvenation is something you can go back to and get refueled. Pivot is I've gone back, I've tried this door, I've tried that door, and they're all locked. Like they're not doing anything for me. And so that to me, I think has been a sign where it's time to, in life, kind of make a pivot.
So Sharon and I had a great conversation over the weekend and kind of reminded me of what a friend told me years and years and years ago, is that, you know, the metaphor is that we're all kind of like our little snails in our shell, right? And for me, working for a big organization was a shell, right? It was theoretically, I think what the pandemic has showed us is nothing is protection. But in my mind, I was feeling very much like this is somehow protecting me. And even though I had grown too big for that shell, like my ideas had gotten bigger, my writing had gotten bigger, my engagement had gotten national and then, you know, North American national, but I was still in this organizational shell that was really uncomfortable. And, you know, at 50 years old, it would seem like a good idea to keep the, you know, fat paycheck and all those nice uh, benefits that come with it. And I decided, you know what, it actually, the shell is so uncomfortable. I'm going to go out and be naked for a while until I find a better shell. So I would even say, you know, as I have started my own business, I started consulting 2.5 years ago. I had been doing it for years, like a dilettante, you know, always with my big organization. And then it was kind of the thing I did on the side. But now, like, I'm doing it for real and it feels very naked. It feels very much like I have no idea what I'm doing on a regular daily basis, but I'm so much happier. You know, so what is it worth? Like, I'm slowly growing a new shell that like fits perfectly into this new kind of phase of ideas and practice. And I have zero idea whether it's going to work out. But oh my God, how fun is the ride? So I don't know. That's what, like, right now, as I think about, like, what is this journey of building my own business? I love hearing about Sharonda's business happening and getting off the ground and all the decisions that she's made and all these other female entrepreneurs in particular that I am rolling around with that, you know, to a certain extent, anybody, I think, who goes out and starts a new business, like, what do any of us know? But we just kind of weirdly trust. And I mean, there's always, to me, it comes down to the community. That's what keeps me from burning out from this. That I decided at the beginning of this that I'm going to give up a stable paycheck and all those lovely benefits. But what really is going to be my wealth is my community. And so I dug into that. I dug into the work. I dug into the community, and that really is what has continued to sustain me and truthfully is in the process of building me a new shell. So Hillary, I'm sorry, I have no idea whether that answered your question or not.
That's lovely. It brought me back to one of the books I got for my niece and nephew this year is Eric Carle's A House for Hermit Crab. And it goes through the whole calendar year, and Hermit Crab keeps adding more things to his house. He like adds some coral and he adds some of this, and it's like each month he adds a little decoration to his shell, which is that kind of symbol of rejuvenation, right? Of like, I need to keep acknowledging, like, and it's all of these beautiful seaweeds that he meets and these starfish and these snails, right? And his shell is getting bigger and more beautiful, and he's getting more energized, and then he realizes he's too big for his shell at the end of that year and has to go out naked, and it's like that rejuvenation and that pivoting all in one. It's a great story. I'm going to pass it over. I think Hamida has another question. And as Hamida and I were discussing this, there were a lot of ideas, a lot of questions came up for us that we wanted to ask you.
Yeah, thank you, Hill. So I just want to affirm that I really dig this like oceanic sort of ecosystem analogy that we're kind of riffing on this morning. Patricia, you sort of started touching on this, but for both of you, you know, sort of noticing patterns, you know, what does burnout look like? What does it mean to break through? Hillary talked about burnout or really experiencing high levels of that stress being cyclic, right? And so how do you kind of go in a sustainable way to really engage in the work that you do? How do you keep yourself going for the marathon?
Patricia, you want me to
start
go?
with this? Nope, Sharon, it's all you. You already got it. It's going to take me a while to sort it out.
So I don't know. I think part of it, I'm still thinking about the rejuvenation piece. So I don't know. When I think about a car, because that's not as fancy or pretty as Oceans, but let's use it as an example. You go, you get your wheels done, you get an oil change. Like sometimes you get your car washed. Maybe you don't like to get your car washed, but there's a regular like maintenance and checking in that to me is a part of like sustainability and a part of rejuvenation. And then the pivot piece is like when I've done all the things to get the car done and worked on and it's not starting anymore. Like we keep stalling. Like that to me is the difference. And so I think for everyone, I do, back to the car analogy, I did a workshop on alignment checks and we were talking about like this group of Black women in leadership, like how do we take some time and like make sure that where we're going in terms of our own like professional journey, personal journey aligns with where we said we want to go. And so same thing with like a car, if your alignment is off, the road and the destination is a little like raggedy. And so for me, I'm an internal processor, though I'm an external person. So like I have to tangibly in my calendar every week, like have some time to focus and like pan out. I also have to like ask myself, like, not what do I necessarily always want to do goal wise, but like, where do I want to be? Like me as a human being, where do I want to be this week? Where do I want to be this month? Where do I want to be this year? And so where I want to be big picture helps me. And if I can like label what that is and like clearly do things within my day, my week, my month that connect to that, that helps me stay refreshed. That helps me stay committed to the work that I'm doing. Having some part of what I do in my work that brings me joy. So like doing this full-time coaching consulting, I think for the most part that will totally bring me joy because that's what I want to do. But even in my job now, connecting with people, helping shift systems, those are the things that bring me joy. And so I think even for folks who are not like loving all of their job right now, or they're finding it really hard, understanding, particularly in leadership, like whatever ways you can pull on how to do a thing that you want to do, even if it's not like totally in the description of your job, but like how you can show up for people or how you can show up in a way that will give you something, I think is really important. And so for me, there's been certain pockets of like parts of my job that I show up in agency wide that necessarily aren't on my like physical job description that just bring me a certain kind of energy. And it's like the people work, it's the changing systems. And so I think the alignment, the self-care, in the sense of like, where am I? Like taking the temperature check is like the big thing for me that is helpful.
Hey, Sharonda, I have a question for you. Sorry,
Yeah.
I'm going to ask a question. So if there was something, thinking about your 10-year ago self, if there was some piece of advice that you would give your 10-year ago self that you wish you would have gotten as you kind of start this journey into creating your own business with your full cup, do you have anything that would be your advice?
Yeah, I think I got the advice. I just didn't listen. I'll just be honest. I remember being 19, very stressed out about things. Like I've always been a caregiver and a worker. And my mom was like, you need to learn how to pace yourself. Like where you need to go, if you can like pace yourself and like think smart. She always says like work smarter, not harder, which to me I think is about like planning and like having a center. It doesn't mean like finagling a thing. She's like, if you can do that, like you'll be better. But I was like, I'm gonna grind. Like I grew up, not a lot of money, not a lot of resources. I was like, I'm gonna get every position, every title. Like I'm gonna get everything I need to do and like spend a lot of time running. And what I've looked back on the past 10 years is I have a lot of pride in the work that I've done and in the positions I've been able to hold and be a part of, but I'm exhausted. And so I think I actually could have still gotten there. Like when I pan out and think about like when I talk to supervisors and I've had my performance evaluation, or when I think about the things that I'm really good at, I think I could have still gotten the things that I wanted and not been as exhausted. And so I think for me, if I could have given myself the advice and realized, since you're gonna pivot in 10 years anyway, I would have like not had as much stress trying to control the narrative, understanding that like, given the fact that we've hit a global pandemic, I don't have as much control over certain aspects of the narrative. I have control over where I can see myself, where I can place myself, and parts of my quality of life. Not always the nuances of like the day-to-day stuff. That's what I would have listened to my advice. That's what I would have
It's
done.
like a good advice columnist. You always know the answer. It's that you write to them because you want somebody else to tell them tell you what the answer should be.
Mm-hmm.
I love that. So if I had to answer that question, the advice, I don't know if I would have given myself the advice, but so last year I went through a very grown-up process of branding myself and my business. It really felt like, oh, this is what the grown-ups do. Okay, I'm going to do that. And what we dug into is your mission and values. And for me, my business is myself. Myself is my business. I wish I would have done that like 10 years ago. I feel like I would have made perhaps the same job decisions, but I think I would have approached it in a different way. I would have approached it in a really long arc of like, this is my personal mission. This is my personal values. I was kind of living them, but I hadn't really stated it, and I think I just would have made different decisions. So yeah, that branding process, whether I did it just for myself or whether I even like invested the money, like I don't think it was a bad thing to go to a professional and get that investment. But it has so solidified for me what it is that I do. I just happen to do it in fundraising. But what I'm interested in is how relationships work and how people work together. That's what feeds me. I'm interested in how communities are built. And I just happen to do that in fundraising because there's no quicker way to screw up or solidify a relationship than the exchange of money, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or the exchange of like help. But I could go in and, work in pretty much any job and say my mission is still about building wonderful, feeding relationships. Yeah. So I love that. I'd be curious. If you guys want to put in the chat, I will check into. I'm curious what you would give everybody here, if you want to put in the chat, what advice you would give your current self or give your 10-year-old self from your current self.
Oh man, Patricia, I really dig that question. I think I need to think about that. So many good things about sort of like pacing, like self-awareness, like really thinking about what are the decisions that are really crucial for me now. Sharonda, you started a conversation around self-care, or you mentioned self-care. And this is my last formal question before we transition to open dialogue, where we get to have participants, ask our speakers some questions. So really, could you both talk a little bit about self-care and what that means for you and its significance in your life?
Yeah, I think self-care means not necessarily, can mean a couple of things. And we talked about this like in our conversations leading up to this conversation. Patricia and I talked about this like over the weekend when we had a chance to chat. And self-care on one hand can mean like, I sniff candles, I love them. I spend too much money on Bath and Body Works, like I take a bath. Like I think there is this part of like, oh, I want to do something that feels good for my body or that is like indulgent. But to me, I think that at the root of it, self-care is like some time and intentionality with myself and what my values are and being in spaces that align with that. And so I think a lot of times when we talk about self-care, it's really like commodified, like it's very much so like go do a thing, go get a thing, like go take a vacation, go, take a bath, go spend money on a yoga retreat. And I think there's a lot wrapped up in that, like capitalism and like, I think that we live in a very
and fixing yourself.
Fixing yourself. And that's
you don't need to fix yourself in a broken system.
That's the thing that I think I'd like to at least voice for people. Like we've been talking about burnout in the sense of like, what do you do for yourself and how do you take care of yourself? But sometimes you're a part of systems that don't work and that intentionally burn you out. And so we can sometimes make a choice to leave those systems. And when it comes to like racism, we can't just like plop out of that system. And so I think that there's also this piece to acknowledge, like in the workspace or in the places that we're in, there is part of burnout is really connected to also like privilege. And so for me, I found that like my self-care is like setting a boundary. It's like not being the representative for all of the people of color. It's like telling white people in workspaces to go back and do their own stuff. Like sometimes that is my self-care, is like my actual boundary. Or it is, you know, that I need to cut my phone off and like decompress. It's rest. Like it's doing things that other people are telling me I'm supposed to do, or it's not engaging in people's narrative of me. Like I think at the root of it is like, what is the narrative for myself? But that's self-care. So I think it's a very like loopy answer maybe. But I think I want to acknowledge for people on this call, some of that is not you. Sometimes it's the systems that we're a part of. And I think taking a minute to go, like when someone's like, just go take a bath, go drink some wine, give me a raise.
I need a raise and a personal assistant. That is my self-care choice.
Yes. And I was just about to, I remember what you talked about in terms of, you know, one of your friends and around like getting this assistant. So I want you to talk about, I'm going to throw it to you, Patricia. But that's
I love this conversation because I've been having a number of conversations, very timely wise, with my boss lady friends about like this whole self-care thing. And they're like, I don't need another smelly candle to kind of soothe me out of like this really righteous anger that I need a raise and a personal assistant. And she was having a lot of shame. This one conversation I was having in particular, she was having a lot of feelings of shame about she had hired a virtual assistant. She's like, does that make me like a bougie weirdo? Like, what does that do? I'm like, you're running 5 different lines of engagement. 3 of them are community based, 2 of them are business based. Get an assistant. You don't need a massage. You need somebody to answer your emails. And I think particularly for women, and I'm going to say a sweeping statement, in nonprofit, there's somehow this expectation that you need to do more, be more, and oh my God, if you could just sort out whatever your mental weirdness is and your stress by having a bubble bath or a massage or taking a vacation. I'm like, you actually need to like also lean into asking for and creating a life that gives you help so that you don't constantly go through burnout. That's a cost. That's an opportunity cost. So yeah, so I'm all for the candles and stuff, but not when they're like a palliative, to take your attention away from what you really need to burn down, right, Sharonda?
Yes.
So both of you, I really appreciated the way that you talked about really tapping into the self and understanding. So what are my needs right now? And do they align with that broader narrative of let me get a glass of wine, a candle, a bubble bath, or not? And sometimes self-care doesn't look like that, right? Sometimes, absolutely, Patricia, self-care is that assistant. Sharonda, self-care is that, important boundaries. I've heard a saying that boundaries help me and help me love you, right? So what is the importance in ensuring that our own needs are met, right? In order to help us be full people, but also to help be present with other folks. So at this point in time, we're going to transition to our open dialogue with our folks, with all of our folks. And we're going to have about a little over 15 minutes to kind of ask questions of our speakers. So if you'd like to ask a question, feel free to drop your name in the chat so I can start stacking orders of folks. You can also just type your question in the chat and I can read those out loud. And I will also put that in the chat. And while I'm finding stuff to copy and paste in the chat, we already have a question from, I hope I'm getting your name the way that you'd like it, Asandi. So Asandi shared that raises a question about how do you avoid or emerge from burnout when you love what you do within an organization and if entrepreneurship is not your calling?
And Hamida, just as we go into this, I am going to stop the recording now. So we hope that makes this a more trustworthy and confidential space.
We can do some truth telling here.